You wake up, and nothing calls to you. The light comes through the window. Your coffee sits cooling on the nightstand. Your phone rests on the pillow beside you, glowing with 17 notifications from the night before. And yet, in this moment of waking, before the day has even begun, you feel it. That peculiar flatness. Not tiredness, not depression in the classical sense. Something stranger. A numbness that sits beneath your ribs like a weight that doesn't quite press down. It simply exists, inert, stealing the color from everything you're about to do. You reach for the phone. Not because you want to. Because it's the reflex now. Because somewhere in the architecture of your brain, a pathway has been worn so deep that your hand moves before your mind catches up. You scroll, news, social feeds, messages you don't urgently need to read. 30 minutes dissolve. You feel emptier than when you started. More hollow somehow than if you'd simply stared at the ceiling. This is the particular exhaustion of being over 40 and chronically overstimulated. You're not lazy. You're not depressed exactly. You're neurologically tired in a way that no amount of rest touches. The thing that excited you 5 years ago, that notification, that video, that piece of information, barely registers now. You scroll past it without even slowing down. Your brain has learned to demand more and more, to feel less and less. There's a gap that's opened up inside you. On one side sits everything you know you should do, the project that matters, the person you should call, the habit you should build, the book you intended to finish. On the other side sits what you can actually want, and the distance between them has become a chasm. You can push yourself through the should, certainly. You have discipline. You have decades of momentum. But the wanting, that electric pull that used to make things feel possible, necessary, alive, that has evaporated. What remains is obligation wearing the mask of productivity. Your motivation sounds like a general sending troops into battle, not like an artist stepping into the studio at dawn because the work pulled them awake in the night. You've forgotten what that feels like. The peculiar thing is that you remember it. You remember when your phone was a portal, when a message could genuinely excite you, when a new skill was calling to you, when a conversation could hold your attention for hours, when sitting down to work on something that mattered didn't feel like pushing a boulder uphill with your forehead. You have the memory of vitality, and that makes this flatness sharper. It's not that you've never known better. You have. You did. Why this hits differently after 40 is something most people don't talk about. It's not weakness. It's not that you've lost your edge. It's that decades of high-stimulation living have metabolized something essential in your nervous system. Your brain evolved for a world of scarcity, for occasional rewards, for the dopamine spike of finding food or achieving status or deepening a connection. Your brain did not evolve for this, an environment engineered to deliver a hit of novelty every 13 seconds. Every scroll, every notification, every algorithm designed by people whose job it is to hijack exactly the reward circuits that used to make life feel worth living. And here's the thing nobody tells you. Your flatness isn't a character deficiency. It's not a sign that you've become complacent or lazy or burned out. It's a symptom, a biological signal. Your brain has been recalibrated by constant stimulation, and the dopamine system that used to make you feel alive has been fundamentally rewired. The chemistry that creates motivation, that generates the sense that something matters, that builds the capacity to want, that's been compromised. But here's what changes everything. It's reversible. There is a specific mechanism driving your experience. There are receptors in your brain that have become insensitive. There are pathways that have weakened because they haven't been used. There is a tonic baseline, the quiet hum that makes life feel worth living, that has collapsed into flatness. And every single part of this can be restored, not with more discipline, not with another productivity app, but through understanding what's actually happening and then giving your nervous system what it needs to recalibrate. What you're about to learn will make your own experience suddenly make sense. And once it makes sense, restoration becomes possible. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Understanding the dopamine system is like finally having the key to a lock you've been rattling against for years. It reframes everything: your flatness, your scrolling, your inability to care about things that should matter. But dopamine isn't what you've been told it is. That popular narrative about dopamine being the pleasure chemical is beautifully wrong. It's a useful misconception that has survived because it's simple, but simplicity here costs you the truth. Dopamine isn't about pleasure at all. It's about wanting. It's about salience. It's the neurotransmitter that makes things matter to you, that pulls you forward, that whispers to your nervous system. This is significant. This is worth your attention. This is worth your effort. Think about that distinction carefully. Pleasure is the experience of something being good. Wanting is the drive towards something before you have it. Your brain can release dopamine when you expect a reward long before the reward arrives. A notification about to appear causes a dopamine spike before you even see what it says. The anticipation itself floods your mesolimbic system. This is why your brain has been so thoroughly hijacked by your phone. It's not that each notification is genuinely rewarding. It's that each potential notification triggers dopamine release. Your brain is being flooded with the wanting signal dozens of times per hour, and that wanting isn't tied to anything that actually satisfies. But dopamine operates in two distinct modes, and this is crucial to understanding your flatness. There's tonic dopamine and phasic dopamine. Tonic dopamine is the baseline. It's the quiet hum underneath your day that makes life feel worth living. It's the neurochemical whisper that says, yes, existing is good. Food tastes interesting. Conversation feels meaningful. Work feels purposeful. This baseline is what's been compromised in you. It's not crashed entirely, you can still function, but it's been dimmed so much that nothing quite registers as mattering. Phasic dopamine is different. It's the spike. The burst in response to novelty or unexpected reward. It's the dopamine that shoots through your brain when something surprising happens. Your phone is engineered to generate phasic dopamine spikes. Constant, unpredictable spikes. These spikes are powerful, and they're addictive because your brain learns to chase them. But here's the trap. Your tonic baseline is being depleted to fuel these phasic spikes. Your brain allocates a finite dopamine budget, and if you're spending it on dozens of small bursts throughout the day, there's nothing left for the slow, deep reward of actually living your life. The actual pathway doing this work is called the mesolimbic system. Picture it. Dopamine neurons firing from a region in your brainstem called the ventral tegmental area, projecting down to a structure called the nucleus accumbens. This is your reward circuit. This is what makes you want to move, to create, to connect, to explore. When this pathway is functioning optimally, it's driving you toward genuine things, toward meaningful work, toward deepening relationships, toward mastery of skills that matter. When it's dysregulated, it's been hijacked by engineered stimuli that aren't aligned with anything your deeper self actually values. And at the receiving end of these dopamine signals are receptors, specifically D2 receptors. Think of them as locks on your brain cells, waiting for dopamine to come along and turn the key. These receptors aren't fixed in their sensitivity. They respond to the environment. When your brain detects a constant flood of dopamine, which is what happens when you're getting phasic spikes dozens of times a day, it adapts. It downregulates. Fewer receptors appear on the cell surface. The receptors that do exist become less responsive. This is homeostatic adaptation. Your brain is trying to protect itself from overstimulation. But the consequence is devastating. You need more dopamine to feel the same effect. You develop tolerance. This is why nothing excites you anymore. Not because your dopamine neurons have died, not because you're fundamentally broken, but because your D2 receptors have become insensitive. The signal is being sent, but the receivers aren't listening the way they used to. And your tonic baseline has collapsed into a flatness that makes everything feel equally unimportant. The beautiful part, the part that matters most, is that this isn't permanent. Receptor sensitivity is neuroplastic. It can change. It has changed once, and it can change again. Understanding this mechanism is the bridge between hopelessness and restoration. How you arrived at this moment of neurological crisis is not mysterious. It is traceable. It is the direct result of living in an environment that was engineered specifically to exploit the vulnerabilities of your mesolimbic system. Understanding this pathway, how you got here, is essential because it removes the shame from your experience. You are not weak. You did not fail. You were systematically targeted by technologies designed by teams of neuroscientists and behavioral engineers, whose explicit goal was to capture your attention and monetize your engagement. The fact that your dopamine system has been compromised is not a personal failure. It is the predictable outcome of exposure to stimuli that no human brain, certainly not one that evolved over millennia in an environment of scarcity, was designed to withstand. Consider the landscape of reward that your ancestors inhabited. Dopamine spikes were rare and consequential. Finding food meant survival. Achieving social status meant resources and reproductive opportunity. These events were separated by long stretches of ordinary time. Your mesolimbic system evolved to respond dramatically to these infrequent windfalls because that responsiveness kept you alive. But you are not living in that world anymore. You are living in a world where stimulation is infinite, where novelty is algorithmically generated, where your attention is the commodity being bought and sold. Your smartphone is the primary vehicle of this exploitation, but it is not acting alone. The entire digital ecosystem has been optimized around one principle: triggering dopamine release. Social media platforms employ infinite scroll, the removal of natural stopping points that would allow your dopamine system to return to baseline. Each swipe promises that the next piece of content might be the rewarding one. Notification systems are calibrated to arrive at unpredictable intervals, which is precisely what generates the strongest dopamine response. Your brain cannot distinguish between the dopamine released by an actual reward and the dopamine released by the anticipation of a potential reward. This is why checking your notifications is so compulsive. You are not actually seeking the content. You are seeking the dopamine spike that the possibility of content generates. But there is a deeper mechanism at work here. It is called variable interval reinforcement, and it is the most addictive schedule of reward that behavioral psychology has ever identified. Slot machines operate on this principle. A gambler does not know when the next payout will come, so they keep pulling the lever, driven by dopamine spikes in response to the uncertainty itself. Your social media feed operates identically. You scroll because you do not know when the next engaging post will appear. The unpredictability generates dopamine. This is not a bug in social media design. It is the feature. It is intentional. The engineers building these platforms know exactly what they are doing to your dopamine system. And because information feels like nutrition to your brain, you have rationalized this behavior as productive. Reading one more article is not the same as eating junk food, you tell yourself. But neurologically, it activates the same reward circuits. Your nucleus accumbens does not care whether the dopamine spike is coming from a social media notification or a notification that you have received an email. The dopamine response is nearly identical. You are essentially mainlining novelty directly into your mesolimbic system, dozens of times per day, and your brain has responded in the only way it knows how. It has downregulated. It has adapted to the constant flood by making itself less responsive. The receptors have become insensitive. The baseline has collapsed. This collapse has been accelerating for years without your noticing. Each year, the stimulation landscape intensified. Notifications became more frequent. Algorithms became more sophisticated. The platforms refined their understanding of exactly what would trigger your dopamine release. Meanwhile, your dopamine receptors were gradually becoming less responsive. The threshold for feeling rewarded was creeping upward. Activities that once thrilled you, a conversation, a meal, a sunset, began to feel ordinary because your brain had been recalibrated by much more potent stimuli. By the time you reached your 40s, the compounding effect was undeniable. You had spent a decade or more of your adult life training your dopamine system to respond to engineered rewards while ignoring natural ones. The pathways that would have been activated by deep work, by sustained relationships, by subtle beauty, these had atrophied through disuse. Meanwhile, the pathways responding to your phone had been strengthened through constant activation. Your mesolimbic system had been fundamentally reorganized, not by accident, not by your intention, but by the systematic, deliberate design of technologies built to addict you. The flatness you experience now has a name in neuroscience: anhedonia. But the word itself is merely a label for something far more insidious than simple depression. Anhedonia is the erosion of reward salience, the biological signal that tells you something matters. It is not that you have stopped feeling pleasure entirely. Rather, you have stopped feeling the significance of pleasure. Food tastes acceptable. Relationships feel fine. Work gets done. But nothing pulls you forward. Nothing generates the sense that this moment, this action, this connection is worth your attention. This distinction is crucial because it explains why willpower has failed you. You cannot force yourself to want something. Wanting is not a choice. It is a biological signal generated by your dopamine system. When your D2 receptors are downregulated, that signal becomes muted. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles executive function and future planning, is desperately trying to override a flattened reward signal. It is like trying to motivate yourself to run toward something you cannot see, cannot feel, cannot locate. Your rational mind understands the goal. Your neurobiology has stopped voting for it. The nucleus accumbens, that small region deep in your brain where dopamine makes things feel significant, has become insensitive to the very neurotransmitter it depends on. This is the literal seat of your anhedonia. It is not broken. It is not dead. It has simply been recalibrated by years of exposure to superstimuli, rewards so potent, so engineered, so divorced from natural consequence, that your brain has essentially given up on finding salience in ordinary life. Why would your mesolimbic system signal that a conversation matters when it has been systematically trained to respond to infinite scroll? Why would it generate the dopaminergic pleasure of focused work when a notification is scientifically designed to be more stimulating? This is what you have been experiencing without understanding it. The particular exhaustion of intelligent people who have been overstimulated is not laziness. It is not lack of discipline. It is neurobiological misalignment. Your reward system is still firing. Your dopamine is still being produced. But the receptors that translate that dopamine into the feeling of mattering have become deaf to the signal. You are swimming upstream against your own neurobiology every time you try to care about something your brain has learned to signal as unimportant. Consider the distinction between hedonic anhedonia and motivational anhedonia. Hedonic anhedonia is when things that used to feel good no longer feel good when you actually do them. Motivational anhedonia is when things do not feel worth doing in the first place. You likely experience both, but the motivational variety is far more destructive because it prevents you from even beginning. You sit down to work and feel nothing pulling you toward it. You could connect with a friend and feel no urge to reach out. The pathway between intention and action has been severed by a dopamine system that no longer signals these things as rewarding. The deeper cost is existential. When reward salience collapses, the narratives that used to organize your life lose their emotional scaffolding. You can remember intellectually that your work matters, that your relationships matter, that your own growth matters. But you do not feel it. This is why so many high-functioning people describe a creeping sense of meaninglessness. They are accomplishing things. They are maintaining relationships. They are meeting obligations. But none of it feels worth the effort because their mesolimbic system has stopped encoding it as significant. Yet here is the part that changes everything. This is not permanent. Receptor sensitivity is neuroplastic. The same mechanism that caused your dopamine system to downregulate in response to constant stimulation can be reversed. Your D2 receptors can become responsive again. Your tonic dopamine baseline can climb back toward the level where ordinary life feels alive. Your nucleus accumbens can relearn to signal that natural rewards matter. This reversal does not happen through willpower. It does not happen through motivation. It happens through understanding that anhedonia is not a verdict on your character or your future. It is a signal from a temporarily recalibrated system. And recalibration, once understood, becomes reversible. The moment your dopamine system began its descent, you were not conscious of the mechanism at work. No alarm sounded in your nervous system the first time a notification triggered a small spike in your reward circuitry. No warning accompanied the 1,000th time you refreshed your email, checking for a hit of social validation. The downregulation happened silently, neurologically, across months and years until one day you woke and realized nothing felt like it mattered anymore. This is where the neuroscience becomes personal. What began as a concept, downregulation, desensitization, is actually happening right now in your brain. Your D2 receptors, those molecular locks waiting to receive the dopamine key, have been systematically becoming less responsive. When your brain detects chronically elevated dopamine flooding in from engineered stimulation, it responds with an ancient adaptation meant to protect you. Homeostasis. Balance. The system says, if dopamine is constantly high, we will make ourselves less sensitive to it. Fewer receptors, less responsive versions of the ones that remain. This is your brain trying to maintain equilibrium in the face of an unprecedented dopamine barrage. But equilibrium in an overstimulation context is not balance, it is degradation. Because fewer receptors mean you need more dopamine to feel normal. More dopamine means you must seek more stimulation. This is the compensation trap, and it operates invisibly, pulling you deeper with every scroll, every notification, every algorithmic recommendation. What thrilled you last year barely registers now. The dopamine threshold keeps climbing. You are chasing a moving target, and the target is moving because your own receptors have learned to ignore the signal. The tonic baseline, that foundational hum of dopamine that makes life feel worth living, has collapsed in the process. Your brain is spending dopamine on phasic spikes, those momentary peaks in response to novelty and stimulation. Nothing is left for baseline vitality. This explains why you wake exhausted even after sleeping, why you reach for your phone immediately, not because you want to, but because your neurochemistry is no longer generating the tonic dopamine that would make morning feel alive. Your brain expects stimulation as the price of feeling normal. Without it, baseline becomes flatness. This is where your prefrontal cortex enters the tragedy. That region of your brain responsible for executive function, impulse control, and holding future rewards in mind. It needs dopamine to operate. When your dopaminergic pathways are dysregulated, prefrontal function weakens. Willpower becomes neurologically impossible. You are not failing at self-control. You are failing because the system designed to exert control is running on depleted fuel. Your prefrontal cortex is exhausted trying to override a flattened mesolimbic signal telling you that nothing matters. It is like asking someone to run a marathon on an empty stomach. The capacity exists, but the biological substrate does not. The pathways you have not used are atrophying simultaneously. Deep work, sustained relationships, creative struggle. These all depend on dopaminergic reward. When your dopamine is being harvested by engineered superstimuli, these natural reward pathways wither through disuse. The neural connections supporting them weaken. The synaptic density decreases. You are not just experiencing anhedonia in the moment. You are neurologically disconnecting from the very activities that would sustain you if your dopamine system were functioning normally. Your brain has stopped signaling that rest is rewarding. This is perhaps the cruelest irony. Rest, by definition, offers no phasic dopamine spike. In the overstimulation context, your brain has learned to interpret rest as deprivation. The dopaminergic pathways that reward you for stillness have atrophied so profoundly that lying down without a screen feels like punishment. You cannot relax into your own recovery because your neurobiology has been trained to experience quiet as emptiness. But here exists a distinction that changes everything. You are not experiencing dopamine depletion like a battery running dry. You are experiencing receptor desensitization and pathway reallocation. Your dopamine is still there, still being produced, still circulating through your brain. It is simply not reaching the receptors that would make ordinary life feel significant. Your mesolimbic system is intact. It is not broken. It has been recalibrated, and recalibration is reversible. This is the threshold of hope embedded in neuroscience. Baseline restoration is possible because the system that collapsed can be restored. What took months or years to dysregulate can be reset in weeks. Your D2 receptors can upregulate again. Your tonic dopamine baseline can climb. This requires understanding that the reset is not punishment. It is neurobiological correction, a period of strategic abstinence that creates the conditions for your reward system to recalibrate toward health. The mechanism that failed you can be rebuilt. The reset begins not with motivation, but with a choice made in a moment of clarity when you finally understand that your dopamine system is a biological mechanism, not a moral failing. You are standing at the threshold of recalibration, and what lies ahead requires both patience and precision. The core principle underlying dopamine restoration is deceptively simple. Strategic abstinence from engineered rewards creates the neurological conditions for your receptors to become sensitive again. You are not punishing yourself through deprivation. You are creating a signal so clear that your brain has no choice but to upregulate its D2 receptors and restore the tonic dopamine baseline that makes life feel alive. The superstimuli that hijacked your dopamine system must be removed from your environment entirely. Your smartphone is the primary culprit, not because phones themselves are inherently destructive, but because they have been engineered by teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to exploit the exact vulnerabilities in your mesolimbic reward circuit that caused your current dysregulation. Infinite scroll, algorithmic recommendations, variable interval reinforcement through notifications. These are not accidental features. They are intentional dopamine harvesting mechanisms. You must also consider news feeds, streaming platforms, and any algorithmically curated content that offers frictionless stimulation. This is not asceticism or punishment. This is removing the highest hijacking stimuli while preserving normal, life-sustaining activities. For most people over 40, cold turkey abstinence works better than moderation-based approaches. Your prefrontal cortex is already weakened by dopaminergic dysregulation. Willpower-based moderation demands constant executive function, constant decision-making about whether this time you will resist or give in. This depletes the very neural resource you are trying to protect. Cold abstinence, paradoxically, is neurologically easier because it removes the decision fatigue entirely. You are not negotiating with yourself every moment. You have made a clear choice, and your prefrontal cortex is freed from the burden of continuous restraint. You are giving your dopamine receptors an unmistakable signal. The engineered stimulation has stopped. The timeline for receptor resensitization follows a predictable neurobiological arc. In the first days, you will likely experience withdrawal-like symptoms as your dopaminergic pathways begin their rapid recalibration. Anxiety, irritability, restlessness. These are signs that your system is sensing the absence of the stimulation it has become dependent upon. This is not dangerous. This is your nervous system adjusting to a new baseline. During weeks 1 and 2, anhedonia may temporarily worsen before it improves. This counterintuitive worsening happens because your tonic dopamine baseline flattens further as the constant phasic spikes cease. It feels like you are getting worse. You are actually recalibrating. By weeks 3 and 4, you will notice a subtle shift. Normal activities, a conversation, a meal, a walk, an hour of focused work, begin to generate a small but palpable sense of reward. This is your nucleus accumbens beginning to register that these activities matter again. Over months 2 and 3, the improvement accelerates. Motivation returns. Salience returns. Your capacity for sustained attention rebuilds itself. Full restoration typically takes 3 to 6 months, depending on the severity of your baseline dysregulation and how consistently you maintain the abstinence during the reset period. During this window, your nucleus accumbens is systematically resensitizing to dopamine at the D2 receptor level. Tonic dopamine baseline begins climbing naturally, not because you forced it, but because the neurobiological conditions have shifted. Your prefrontal cortex regains its capacity to hold future rewards in mind, to override impulse, to choose what actually aligns with your values rather than what immediately stimulates. This is when the mechanism reveals itself as reversible. Boredom becomes the unexpected ally in this process. Boredom is not your enemy. It is your brain's signal that it is ready to upregulate dopamine in response to lower stimulation activities. Enduring boredom without immediately relieving it through superstimuli is the reset itself. You are training your mesolimbic system to find salience in what is real, what is sustainable, what actually nourishes. Every moment you sit with boredom, instead of reflexively reaching for your phone, you are voting neurologically for recovery. You are teaching your dopamine system that ordinary life is worthy of its attention. Sleep, movement, and stress management become non-negotiable prerequisites during this period. Sleep allows your brain to consolidate the neuroplastic changes occurring at the synaptic level. Movement stimulates dopamine production naturally and helps restore tonic baseline through biological channels that do not require engineered stimulation. Chronic stress depletes dopamine. Stress reduction is essential. You are not adding these practices to your life arbitrarily. You are supporting the fundamental biological processes that make dopaminergic recovery possible. This is not motivational thinking. This is neurobiology as medicine. The weeks ahead carry you through the threshold of visible change. You begin to notice that your morning coffee tastes like something again. Not just a habit, but an experience with texture and warmth. The dopamine system that seemed permanently offline starts sending signals your conscious mind had almost forgotten how to interpret. These are not hallucinations of improvement. These are measurable shifts in receptor sensitivity. Your nucleus accumbens learning once again that ordinary moments contain salience worth attending to. By week 3, you recognize something unexpected. The absence of stimulation has become less painful than the constant, empty reaching for it. Your dopamine baseline is climbing, inch by neurological inch. The anhedonia that defined your flatness begins to lift, not dramatically, but unmistakably. A conversation with someone you care about generates a small current of genuine interest. You find yourself choosing to sit with a book for an hour, not out of discipline, but because your reward system is voting for the activity. This is not willpower. This is neurobiology realigning. The prefrontal cortex, starved of dopamine for so long, begins to recover executive function. You can hold intentions in mind without constant fatigue. You can imagine working on a meaningful project and feel a faint but real pull toward it. The distinction becomes clear. Motivation is returning not as force, but as signal. Your own dopamine system is finally broadcasting that certain activities matter, that effort toward them contains intrinsic reward. This is the mechanism of sustainable motivation, and it cannot be faked or forced. It can only be restored. Around month 2, something shifts more fundamentally. You realize you have not checked the time obsessively in 3 hours while working. You have engaged in a creative effort and felt the small dopaminergic pleasure of problem solving. You laughed at something without cynicism. The pathways your dopamine system abandoned, the ones that respond to mastery, connection, and meaning, are lighting up again. These are not pathways you built recently. They are ancient neural infrastructure, dormant but not destroyed, waiting for conditions that allow them to resume signaling. Your sleep deepens. Movement becomes genuinely rewarding rather than obligatory. The stress that accumulated during your dysregulation begins to metabolize differently because your dopamine system is no longer flagging every moment as a crisis requiring stimulation to survive it. You are not the same person who began this reset. Your neurobiology is different. Your dopamine receptors are more sensitive. Your tonic baseline is higher. The flatness has not been erased. It has been transformed into the capacity to feel texture again. Month 3 brings the accumulation of all these shifts into something you can point to as recovery. Normal life feels genuinely rewarding in ways that seem impossible to have forgotten. A meal tastes like discovery. A conversation contains real interest. Work holds the possibility of engagement and satisfaction. The relationship between effort and reward has realigned itself. You are not chasing dopamine anymore. You are living in concert with a dopamine system that is responding appropriately to appropriate stimuli. What matters now is the distinction between reset and the rest of your life. This reset was necessary, but it is not the endpoint. The dopamine dysregulation took months or years to develop. Recovery takes weeks to months, but maintenance, the conscious redesign of how you relate to stimulation, novelty, and reward, that extends indefinitely. You cannot return to unrestricted digital life without watching your receptors downregulate again. This is not punishment or injustice. This is neurobiology. You now understand that sustainable dopamine health requires architecture, not just willpower. You redesign your environment. Your smartphone remains a tool, but algorithmically curated feeds are deleted. Notifications are silenced. Streaming is bounded by intention, not infinite scroll. This is not deprivation. This is protecting a system that has finally healed itself. The dopamine life you rebuild contains novelty, but novelty earned through growth, learning, meaningful relationships, creative struggle. These deliver dopamine spikes aligned with your actual values and your actual flourishing. The phasic dopamine response to mastery, to connection, to discovery of something real. This is the neurochemistry of a life worth living. You stand now at the far side of your reset, a person whose dopamine system votes once again for what matters. You have proven to yourself that neuroplasticity works both directions. What was dysregulated can be restored. What felt broken was only recalibrated. And a brain recalibrated toward health recognizes itself as capable of sustaining what it has recovered. The flatness you knew is not your destiny. It was a signal. And you have learned to read it.